Jeff Horn, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Will.
Jeff, your story inspired another recent guest of the podcast, JD Hasley. JD put us together, and today we're going to spread this story of yours further. So let's begin, Jeff, with a little background on you. What was your professional path that led you to want to buy a business?
Well, that's a great question, Will. My path started early. My wife and I, had kids at an early age at 21. And so while she was completing her schooling and getting her doctorate of pharmacy, I was out in the business world working. My first position was as a sales executive for a company a technology company that worked with community banks back when the Check 21 legislation came about prior to Y2000, where banks could exchange checks electronically instead of having to exchange the physical check, which everybody does it today. You might even be able to do remote deposit from your cell phone even today. But when those systems first came out, I was young. I understood technology and grasped what we were doing, and so started off doing that. And had a successful endeavor at that for 6-7 years. And then when my wife finally finished pharmacy school and we moved back to Lubbock, Texas, I then did what I had gone to school for, which was finance. Worked in a family specialty finance company for the next 7 years. And we did all sorts of things from equipment finance, equipment leasing, to accounts receivable finance and factoring. And so those were the two positions that I held prior to buying my first business.
And so what was it then that led you to go down the path of buying a business?
Yeah, I think after 15 years for working with people and for organizations, back to my, playing days as an athlete and playing in, high school and college, I just felt a strong sense to lead and wanting to be the leader of an organization. I felt that, entrepreneurial itch to do something for myself and my family and to control my own future, and felt like I could do it. And I don't know, just felt led to that decision over a period of time, and something that as further time went on, I felt compelled to try to make that happen sooner rather than later.
Why buy a business as opposed to some other path? Was that always the plan when you got the entrepreneurial itch, that you'd buy an existing business, or did you consider other paths?
I considered other paths. I that's a great question. I think that in my mind, I think the path that seemed most likely was always to buy a business. Maybe what business or what industry of a business to buy, I don't know that I really had that defined, but I always felt like the path to do that was most likely through buying a business, or, if you wanted to take even more risk, starting up a business. And so I chose the path of buying an existing business.
And when you made this decision, give us a snapshot of your personal life, family, et cetera, responsibilities, and kind of professional life, meaning success or not, or what you were walking away from.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the, right around the 2011, 2012, time frame. We had 3 young boys at that period in time. My wife had a blossoming pharmacy career, working for Walmart and managing a lot of their stores out in the West Texas area. Life was really busy. That was one of maybe the check marks in the column of, stay put where you're at. All of my boys were playing sports and, baseball, basketball, football at the time. Gosh, I think we had a 13-year-old, 9-year-old, and 6-year-old at the time. And so, it was a busy time, and there was a lot, going on. Professionally, I was doing very well. Matter of fact, I was making more money than I ever really thought I would ever make, to be honest. And And I think that a path, for a long-term career, there was definitely possible. But again, I just felt this urging or passion to want to lead an organization of my own someday. And so, ultimately decided to leave and to try to find something.
Was this one of these where you really had to convince your wife, or where your colleagues or people at the business where you were all scratching their heads? Because, you have all these responsibilities, as you said, three boys in the throes of sports and, needing, your family life is just really cranking. So it does seem like it seemed like not the most opportune time to go out on your own,
Yeah.
and you're doing so well at work as it was. So did it take convincing of either yourself or the people around you?
Well, I'll say this: my wife said, "Hey, if this goes bad, this was 100% your decision." But my wife was very supportive. I mean, to the point of being so loyal and supportive. I think she felt, for me supporting her going through pharmacy school and all of that, and then her having a very stable career and being excited about that, she was excited to try to help me, I think. And so she was always extremely supportive. Her having a stable, professional, career as a pharmacist really played a big role in our ability to be able to try something new and to take a risk and buy a business. And so, I would say largely, it was a lot of support. She understood, the situation where I was, and that could be a fine career, but she was, thinking that, it'd be great if we controlled our own path moving forward and to go out and do it. So I would say she was right there with me.
Great. Well, that support is really a blessing. And so what did your search to buy business look like? Did you just kind of leave your employer and start looking, or did you have a lead on a business that looked like a good candidate? What did that look like? What was this transition from employee to business owner? What was your plan there?
Yeah, no, I mean, basically, we separated and moved on and decided to, try to find something else. I took quite a bit of time off after leaving, close to 4 months or so. And, I had an inkling of several businesses in the Lubbock area that might be available. I was really trying to find a good fit for me personally of what fits me. And that would be a company that, is a sales oriented business, something that had a lot of potential for growth. That was also important, but also maybe had some technology, based upon the first position that I held, if it had, something to do with technology, and then also if it had a large finance component. I've always loved math, love finance, love accounting. And so I was really, really curious to try to find something like that. And, the timing's got to work for a seller too. And so really started down the path of, what would be a really good fit for me.
Well, boy, did you find it, as we're about to hear. So tell us about the business that you bought, Benchmark, and how did it come on your radar? Tell us that first, and then tell us about the business, please.
Yeah, well, I had met, the owner of that business, probably 5 to 7 years prior, and real successful, businessman in the Lubbock and West Texas area. Benchmark was one of the leading Xerox agents and dealers in the country. That there's a robust network of Xerox partners that represent them all over the country. And Benchmark got its start in 1994 after their owner had a successful career, as a salesman for the Xerox Corporation. And so, he had Benchmark was nearly 20 years in business, had really established itself in Lubbock and some of the other surrounding communities. And, with it being a technology company, being a company that uses finance, a lot of people, when they buy, a Xerox printer or some other printer or copier, oftentimes those are leased or financed, out there. And then there's a service component as well, an ongoing service component and supply component and all those types of things. And so, found out about that business, which is ultimately the business that we decided to purchase, but looked at a couple of others as well.
And tell us more about Benchmark. Tell us, if you could, the numbers around the business. What size are we talking here?
Yeah, at the time, Benchmark was largely an agent of Xerox, more than they were a dealer of Benchmark. And so what I mean by that is that they would represent Xerox in equipment sales, to school districts, counties, city governments, commercial businesses, what have you, and they would get a commission. But when you total up the total revenues that Benchmark had at the time of acquisition, it was somewhere right between a $5 and $6 million revenue business, performing at about a 20% EBITDA clip, at that point in time.
Well, Jeff, that's about $1 million in SDE, maybe a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really what so many people in this audience would love to find, a business that's already of that size, where with an SBA loan, there's still a lot of cash flow left over to pay themselves a respectable salary and reinvest into the business. How did you think about the size of this business? And did it meet the criteria that you either had or didn't have?
Yeah, I think it was a great fit from a size standpoint. I tell you, I was most excited really about the potential opportunities that I found out through the due diligence process that would be available. Namely that, there were a lot of agents in the Xerox program that didn't want to make the investments necessary to become dealers, which is where the world was headed, less centralized within Xerox to become more of an independent, dealer out there in the world. But that means investment in your back office staff and systems that you use, and investment in your service techs, adding service vehicles. It meant a lot of growth and a lot of investing in the business. But for me, being only 35 at the time, that really excited me about what I felt like the potential was, not only to buy that business, but to bolt on other companies like Benchmark in geographic locations that maybe were adjacent to Benchmark at the time, to go on this agent to dealer transformation, together. And then, I always had felt like if the business made a successful transition from agent to dealer, that there would be a lot of financing opportunities as well to be able to become a complete one-stop shop for people's document management needs.
And did you have that whole vision before you even got into the business, or was this a vision that started to emerge after you were already owner and you really got a lay of the land?
I think early on, I just knew that Benchmark was a company that had, was really well ran, and that it had a lot of potential to keep going and moving forward. No, the vision was painted over a period of time after doing a lot of due diligence, a lot of talks with the owner, and creating that vision together. Quite honestly, that the company would go over the next couple of years as we transition the business from one, CEO and owner to the next, and being me. And so, that was built over about a 6 to 12 month period, but we're really proud of the fact that, he and I developed all of that together, and it was important to do that together because it kept him having a vested interest in moving forward in the success of Benchmark. And we're still friends today. Matter of fact, I'm going to see him later today and have lunch. So we're excited about
great.
that.
But wait, sorry, did you say that all of that working with him to develop the strategic direction was pre-close or post-close?
Well, it was a little of both. I certainly had a vision to enhance or speed up the transformation between being an agent to a dealer, creating a captive finance company. But but he's really the one that had all the relationships with the adjacent companies in adjacent territories and stuff like that. And so we worked together really to come up with that strategy. And we, after we closed on our transaction, then we really started working on a process for how Benchmark could do other acquisitions over the coming years and building those relationships with the other owners of the other businesses.
Well, the reason I ask, Jeff, is because one of the features of our world is the trust that you have in the seller, or lack of trust in some cases. And if you don't know the seller, of course, getting to the point where you're comfortable that they're telling you the truth is a key part of the negotiation and deal journey. It sounds like that wasn't really an issue. You guys were almost working as partners even before the deal closed. Say more about why this relationship, the way you're telling it, seems so seamless.
Well, it's quite the opposite, really. We knew of each other, but we didn't know a whole lot about each other prior to, entering into a LOI and then going through the due diligence process. But, we ran a thorough due diligence process when we were acquiring that. And, that seller did a great job of going through all of that due diligence process with me. And I would just say it was a seller that was really committed to not only selling his business, but also committed to ensuring that Benchmark would be a viable company for years to come. That was really important to him. And so I would really say, Will, the biggest thing for people that are looking at businesses to buy is like, the very first box you have to check is that character box. And if you're doing a deal with somebody, their character is as important as anything, because there's so many steps that you go through in buying a business and closing a transaction, and then the transition afterward is like, you're not always going to agree. And so you really better have a lot of confidence in that person to be fair, to be able to talk through things and work through things. And, that was something that I was fortunate to have and during this process. And I think that gentleman would tell you the same thing, that he was pleased with the way his people were taken care of and the attention to detail on the business.
That's great, Jeff. Okay, tell us more, please, about this vision that you and the owner kind of co-developed, and this trend that was happening from agent to dealer, and maybe really just the definition of those. Let me take a stab. So by agent, the model historically had been that you were effectively contracted sales teams for Xerox. You'd sell into your local, whatever, school systems, et cetera, like you said, and then be paid by Xerox a commission. And that was the core of the relationship. And this shift to a dealership model was much more. There was much more. We'll say more, please, about what it means to be a dealer versus just an agent.
Yeah. So the agent model, you said it correctly. It was almost like you're a salesperson for Xerox and you sell it, and then the company gets the commission, and that comes as revenue to the company. The post sale or the service revenue that would follow up an equipment sale to, say, a school district or something like that, all of that post sale revenue would go to Xerox, and then Xerox would also pay us a commission of that post sale revenue. A dealer model would be the same situation occurring, except instead of us representing Xerox, Benchmark would buy the equipment wholesale from Xerox and then sell it to that same school district. But instead of signing them up on Xerox service, we would sign them up on Benchmark service with our own technicians and own support team there. And so by doing that, if you sold $100,000 piece of equipment, you might make $15,000 to $20,000 as an agent, but selling the same $100,000 piece of equipment, you might buy that piece of equipment for $50,000 to $60,000 wholesale, and then you would sell it for $100,000. So you would make a $40,000 margin, and then you'd get all the post sale revenue as well, off of prints. And so had I had a chance to make a really, terrific financial impact on the business from a revenue growth standpoint and margin growth standpoint. But it did require other investments in other parts of the business as well. Hope that all makes sense to you.
That was great. And so the catch, if you will, because it just sounds like basically more revenue. What can you complain about there? Is that you were going to have to build out infrastructure, and so just a lot of folks didn't have the appetite for that, and so a younger, but just generally hungrier agent is going to be somebody who's going to pursue that, but a lot of the agents would just rather not.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, because there was, you're talking about a lot of people that had already in the Xerox ecosphere where, that had spent 20 to 30 years, I would say a little bit more set in their ways. I come along, I don't know, I don't know that much about, how that business is working, and I'm learning in it every single day. But I did bring a fresh perspective to it, and saw the benefits financially and on an potential exit someday on what that type of revenue growth would bring to the table, and knew that the investments in the back office and infrastructure needs, and let's call it what it is, an increased amount of working capital that would be required would pay dividends in an exit for the business someday. And so I think that's one of the things that excited me most about the business was being able to be a part of that transformational next chapter for Benchmark, and then also by being a dealer, having a lot of opportunities to provide financing for all of those customers as well.
Well, and we're definitely going to want to hear about that. But just to understand again, this shift in model that was happening, driven, I guess, by Xerox itself. Xerox's motivation here, because it's now losing revenue, it's basically shifting that revenue to you all, I guess, is because it wasn't a core competency for Xerox. They wanted to just focus on the manufacturing and not have to deal with service, essentially, and they were willing to let that revenue go to you all, the dealers.
Yeah, I would say, I wasn't privy to the inner workings at Xerox, but what I would say is, like, and Xerox was a great partner, by the way. What I would say is that, you're talking about a mammoth organization that had been around for, a long period of time, and their business from a macro level was really changing to where it was getting harder and harder for them to be able to effectively generate the return they wanted to by having all of that infrastructure in-house on the agent side, where they were deploying and installing this gear and all of that, and then servicing it. When you get that big and become that, and you're in a period of time where there's, in the document management space, where there's really, as technology increases every day, there was a lot of consolidation going on. And so it was really hard for them to keep, in Jeff's opinion, keep their costs contained to deliver the margin. So I think their thought process was, let's decentralize all of our processes. Let's encourage more authority locally. Let's give them the tools to run their own businesses, and let's slim up the mothership to be able to be a good partner and provide support to our partners instead of providing support to the end customer. And I think they also felt like that by doing so, you had a real chance for customer satisfaction to improve even more by getting more local people involved in the decisioning. I compare it a lot of times, when I was back at Benchmark, to education, making choices for our kids locally, rather than making them nationally and having national programs. Oftentimes different pockets of the country are going to want to do different things. And,
sure.
And I feel like, not trying to be political, but I'm just saying, I felt like that was a good move on Xerox's part.
And Jeff, so on this podcast, we encounter franchising a lot. People who will buy an existing franchise business there's all sorts of strategies that could flow from that. I feel like a dealership is maybe a cousin to franchising, but we don't see a lot of dealership businesses, acquisition entrepreneurs who buy existing dealership businesses. So it's not a model that we talk about hardly ever, really. Is what you described here kind of the typical dealership model that you'd see from, I don't know, a tractor company or a machinery company or whatever other industries where I guess a dealership model is most common where the product is machinery, from everything from cars to copiers to tractors.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, anything that's equipment centric where you're gonna have an ongoing support need or something along those lines. I do think there's differences. I don't think Xerox's dealer program is the same as GMC's dealer program, out there for a automobile dealer, but I do think that there's a lot of similarities into how the programs work and the economic model, for those dealers and what that means and, stuff like that.
Yeah. And is it typically, or I know you can't generalize, but to the extent of your knowledge, is it typically that there's no sort of equivalent to licensing fees like there is in franchise land, right? You're basically buying wholesale and then reselling and becoming the service provider. And then there's, I'm sure, rules and regulations around how, of course, you use the brand and what you can do with the equipment, how you can sell it at what price point. I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff there. What else are kind of the key points that somebody would evaluate whether or not a dealer relationship with the manufacturer is good, is profitable to them?
Yeah. Well, I think, and I'm involved in a franchise business today, so I can speak a little bit to the differences between dealerships and franchising. I think in a dealership, you have a lot more autonomy on what pricing you want to go into your customers with. You're certainly going to buy your product from your supplier, which in this case is Xerox, for, a certain price. But then, if you're in a competitive situation, and back to the $100,000 example I gave a while ago, if you need to be at $87,000 to win the business, then you, as the, control person in that business, you can make the decision on, do I want to accept this sale at $87,000 or not, and move forward, with that. It really reduces the need to be able to, or reduces the ability to go to Xerox and say, hey, will you help us do that and all that? There's no interaction there between that. On the franchising side, a lot of the pricing is controlled by the franchisor. Your royalty payments are built in as a percentage up front. And so it's a much more programmatical, I would say less control type of deal. That can be good or bad if you have a really great franchisor. And we're
you as the franchisee have less control.
Yeah, you as the franchisee have less control in that situation. But most of the times those economic models are very well put together and make a lot of sense. And you're trying to do something repetitive across many different, locations across the country, like at whether it's oil change places or fast food restaurants, stuff like that. And so the thing that I really enjoyed about the dealer model is that it gave me, the business owner, a lot of control. Your perks or your special pricing or the ability to earn or make more money. Xerox, you would be given a quota of equipment to purchase. And let's just, for example purposes, say, hey, benchmark, you're supposed to buy $1 million of equipment per year. If you bought $1 million, then Xerox might give you a rebate or, a discount on your next $500,000 or $1 million of equipment to lower that price even more. And so when times were really good and you were close to hitting those thresholds, you might make another investment into the business to, buy a bunch of equipment in advance of future sales or something like that to lower your cost of goods sold, in the business. And so again, it's that control mechanism of a dealership that I really like the most.
Well, and I think emblematic of having more autonomy is that the company has its own name, Benchmark.
Yeah.
As opposed to in a franchisee model, the holding company of the units might have its own name, but it's not front and center. It's not out there. It's just on the LLC documentation. In this case, you're out there marketing Benchmark's services. Yeah, you're selling under the Benchmark name.
Yeah, that's correct. And so, not only do you control the front end aspects, but you control the back end aspects of does Benchmark have high customer satisfaction with its customers? And, are we providing good service? Are there things we can do different now as a dealership to differentiate us from other dealers with other manufacturers? And the answer to all that was yes. It was just a matter of, how you wanted to package it up and how good of a job did you want to do taking care of your customer base.
And another feature of franchise networks and being a franchisee is controls around territory or location density, so that the franchisor should be protecting franchisees from stepping on each other's toes, competing in the same market against one another. I'm sure there's a spectrum there. But in general, there's this concept of kind of territories. Is it the same in dealer relationships generally, or might Xerox have 5 dealers all in your market who are all kind of competing with each other and beating each other up?
I think it depends manufacturer to manufacturer, but I think that was one of the things that you really, as an owner, had to get your head around, because Xerox in the agent world, they had very defined geographies and territories. Whereas, if Benchmark was the agent in Lubbock County, Texas, there was no other agent in Lubbock County, Texas. And you had dedicated accounts to you, and nobody else would be given any sort of ability to come in and compete with you on that. As it migrated from agent to dealer, you did have to get used to there being other competitors at maybe the low end of your smallest products, or perhaps at the highest or the most sophisticated and advanced products. That did take time to get used to. And so what ended up happening is that the lines really kind of blurred or have disappeared. I think now, some 13 years later, there's oftentimes 2 or 3 dealers in covering a specific geography or whatnot. And really, the company that can compete and do the best, with the business wins. And so that was probably a little bit of a drawback. But again, when you're wrestling with, hey, I want to control our future and I want to be able to make whatever decisions are best for this particular company, then, the dealer model was the only way to go. And that just was something that you had to get used to.
Another appealing aspect of franchises for this audience who's acquisition minded is that you can, let's say, buy into an existing franchise system and then programmatically acquire other units within that system without all of the difficulties and friction of integration. So, of course, acquiring businesses and trying to integrate them into the acquiring business is a big, difficult task, and it's one of the giant friction points in this world of buying businesses. If I buy a few Midases and then I want to add on other Midases, they're already using the same systems. They've already got the same menu of all the SOPs are the same. Everything's the same, and so the integration can be seamless or even non-existent. It's already all there. Is there any analog to that in buying other dealers, or no? These are all autonomous businesses with their own back ends, their own SOPs, and it's just the integration. There's no real economy there in integration in a dealership model.
Yeah, that was, I was a little bit naive on the first acquisition that we did, thinking that, well, everybody did it like Benchmark did it in the Xerox world, and there was a lot of similarities. But there was quite a few differences too, that had to get used to. And so it was a little bit different than franchising. There was, each one of these dealerships had a little bit more individualism to each one of them, and that you really had to work through that. After I did the first acquisition and figured out, hey, they're, company B here that we're acquiring, they've got a lot different comp plan than what we have. And are we going to merge them into our comp plan? Are we going to keep their comp plan? They respond to service calls differently than we do. They do this differently than we do. And so, I learned through that process of, going through all of that, of like identifying all of the things that we were different on, and then really creating a plan around, are we going to continue to support that methodology? Or are we going to move them into, the way we do that? And, and I would say, our first acquisition went great, but I would say too, that I learned a lot through that process and figured out a few things not to do again, and a few things that you absolutely needed to do, and maybe even do them a little bit quicker. And so, it's not a perfect bag every time. It was something different on each one of them.
Do you recall any of those biggest lessons on what to do or what not to do?
Well, I think, on the, like specifically with comp plans, these are, these dealers are largely very entrepreneurial, very sales oriented. Your salespeople feel like they own their own business within their geography. Changing comp plans was a big deal. I was probably a little bit naive to that the first time we did it, thinking, hey, they'll love our, comp plan that we created because ours is the best and all of that. But, it really helped me after the first time to do that, seeing the reaction that people had and all that. Not that we were trying to do something bad, but it was really to learn to be more purposeful and methodical when, like dealing with somebody's pay and stuff like that. The second and third times through is like to, we'll create the best, instead of, hey, we're going to use Benchmark's comp plan and we're going to eliminate this comp plan. Maybe we merge components of that together and let that happen over the next, the next year, do it, down the road or something like that. But other things like how to handle a support call, there was a lot of synergies gained by having one call desk, the same, being consistent and people answering the phone. Don't try to delay a name change. Everybody knows the business is selling anyway. Let's be upfront about that and move forward with that and get past that and get everybody, pulling together in one culture. So, there was things that I learned that say, hey, slow play this, but let's move fast in this general direction. And I think every time our staff did an acquisition, we would get better and better, as they went by.
I'm going to want to hear a little bit more about what these acquisitions kind of all amounted to, because that's a big part of how you grew the business. But let's now return to the story, but we're not there yet.
Okay.
The structure of the deal. Do you recall how you put this together, and what year are we in now?
We're in late 2012, at the very end of the year in 2012. Business was about a $5 million business, doing about $1 million of EBITDA a year. We did a 4 to 5x. We felt that was market, for that type of business. So we largely put that purchase price. We did it as a stock purchase, which was what
was that about?
Well, that was, we originally wanted to purchase the assets, but for the tax effect for the seller, to try to make it work for the seller, we did a stock purchase agreement, which obviously, involves a lot more reps and warranties and indemnifications, and, oftentimes makes the agreement a little bit more complicated and more risk on the buyer, because you're assuming, some unknown obligations, at the time. But we did a stock purchase and got past all of that, and did I would say a kind of right down the fairway deal where we paid 80% of that transacted amount up front to the seller, and then had an earn out over the next 3 to 4 years for him as the company met certain metrics, making those additional payments. And so that was largely the structure of the deal. And then it also included, he owned the main building we in Lubbock, and we signed up a long-term lease for that facility as well, which was a great facility. So that was a smart move on the business to make.
Mm-hmm. And Jeff, first of all, the 20% of the sellers, was that an earnout, or was that a forgivable seller note?
No, it was an earnout.
Okay, because there was also an SBA loan involved, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
You finance
yeah, so that was what the seller got, but how I financed that transaction is, went to a community bank that I had an established relationship for a long period of time. Matter of fact, I worked there between high school and college as a teller long back in the day. But I took the equity proceeds that I had received in my prior position and really put those as a down payment or pledge against a note against the business there at Benchmark, and set up a 10-year note on the business and just monthly payments, pretty straightforward. I remember how nervous I was whenever, for all those other owners. I mean, that's when the moment becomes real, when you're calling your wife to meet you at the bank and say, hey, we're signing personal guarantees, on these loans. And, it becomes very real for you in that moment, that you are stepping out of your comfort zone and getting into an owner mentality for the first time.
Yeah, well, especially with a personal guarantee, which of course is an understandable, if unfortunate, feature of the SBA loan.
Yeah.
These days, Jeff, SBA doesn't permit earnouts. Forgivable seller notes, yes. So, a business not meeting past performance, you can have some of that seller note forgiven. But technically, these days, you can't incentivize a seller and pay them above and beyond the purchase price over time based on performance. The 80%, which was the SBA loan, you pledged equity that you had from your previous employer. Does that mean that was a deposit that you put in, or it was just assets that you had that they were going to come after if you didn't pay your loan? Did you have to put equity yourself into the actual transaction?
Well, it was that equity that I had was in the form of both cash and a receivable from that prior business that I was involved in. So all of that was pledged, and yes, they could come after that if we weren't performing on our Benchmark loan with the bank.
Yeah. A detail, actually, that from our pre-call, Jeff, about that equity from the previous employer was that the amount that you had potential to earn was a lot higher when you walked away to go buy a business, to go out on your own and buy a business, that they knock that number down.
Yeah.
Say more about that, because I think it demonstrates how really badly you wanted to go be an entrepreneur. You walked away from a lot of money.
Yeah, no, I did. I took a 70 to 80% discount on my stock value to want to leave and do my own thing, which was something that I was, that I really, really wanted to do. And so it came at a tremendous financial cost, but, still did well, there, and was something that, that I wanted to do. And that remaining 20 to 30% that I had was enough to be able to, get the job done with the bank and make them feel comfortable with the business that they were now financing.
Yeah. Well, I maybe should have underlined this point back when we were talking about the timing of your decision to go do this, with the busyness of your family life and all of the responsibilities and swirl of your life at that particular moment, that you also walked away from a significant amount of money. You're leaving 80 to 70% of the equity on the table to go off and do this. So really, I can see why JD was inspired. Jeff, thank you for explaining the deal to us. Okay, so you become owner of this $5 billion business that you paid about the same amount. It's doing about $1 million of EBITDA. We've touched on a lot already of what your vision was for it, transitioning from agent to dealer. You have mentioned that you did a number of acquisitions. Maybe why don't we do this? Why don't you tell us where you exited, what the business looked like when you exited, so we can understand where this is all going, and then we'll unpack a little bit of exactly what you did to get it there. What was revenue when you exited?
Yeah, so we exited, revenue was right at $30 million, with a $30 million annual in revenue, with a projected next 12 months of really close to $35 million in revenue, as that full agent to dealer migration and growth and all the acquisitions had kicked in. And at that point in time, at 30 million, we were a $3 to $4 million a year EBITDA business as well. And so probably a little harder as the business became a dealer. The expectation to have a 20%, bottom line became a little bit more, difficult to achieve. But there was so much more revenue there. And, it ended up being a good deal.
Yeah. And how long did it take you to grow from 5 to 30 million?
Well, that took us 5 years. So, 5.
Are you saying that's a long time or not a long time? Because to me, that doesn't seem like so long to build a business to $30 million with 35 coming the next year.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's a great run, Jeff.
Yeah, no, it is. It is a great run. We did 5 acquisitions during that time. Tell
us what you did here.
Yeah.
Please.
So we acquired 4 other Xerox businesses that were really close to what we did day in, day out, some larger, some smaller, that helped us grow into new geographies and really expand our footprint across Texas and New Mexico, even more. And then we bought one business that was a little bit different than what we did. We bought a competitive dealership that had a big relationship with HP, was more of a supply and technology type business, as we started to turn our attention to, doing more managed services and getting into IT services a little bit more, in the last part of my tenure there at Benchmark. And so, that was the last acquisition that we did. But I would say largely, I kind of put it into 3 different buckets. I think our lead bucket of growth over those 5 years was definitely the agent to dealer, transformation. And then I think our second bucket, of growth would have been our acquisitional growth. And then our third bucket was the ancillary services that we added, like the finance component or the IT services or managed services component as well, that we added to that. So those are the 3 really main drivers of all the growth that the business experienced.
And did you just rank them in terms of how much impact they had?
Yes, that's what I was doing is, I would say that was the rank of the impact to the revenue growth and the bottom line growth that the company experienced.
And when you talk about this shift from agent to dealer, was that something that you were then layering into all your acquisitions? So it was not just Benchmark, the first platform, but these other ones, these other acquisitions, you were also then bringing that benefit to all of them. So there was this kind of double dipping. You were growing through acquisition, and then each of these acquisitions, you were transitioning from agent to dealer so that they would all also improve that way.
Yes, that is correct. And so that's a good way to, I don't know, I guess double dipping is a little bit correct in the sense that, you are acquiring these businesses, and by merging them in with Benchmark, the main company, you would achieve some synergies with the business, but it also gave you fresh territory or ground, if you will, to be able to go execute on more agent to dealer, growth and adding to your, post-sale revenue, which was the coveted component of our financials, was to get as much recurring revenue going as we could possibly do, in the business.
And so of that 30 million, how much of it was this really high quality, great recurring revenue?
When at the $30 million mark, a little less than half of it. So I'd say about 45% of it was recurring revenue, which was great because, again, if you'll remember back to early in our conversation, had to invest heavily in our back office and infrastructure and those types of things. And our employee count had swollen and grown. And so, having that recurring revenue made it a lot easier as the business owner to be able to forecast, what we're doing, where we're headed, what objectives do we want to try to accomplish in that particular year. And so, but the recurring revenue was pretty much the golden goose of the business.
Sure. We'll assume that that's also what private equity was interested in when they came knocking.
Yeah.
We're about to get there. How many employees were you at when you exited?
That's a great question. I think we were right around the 90 mark. So around 90 or so employees. And of those 90, about a third in sales, about a third in the back office or operations, and then about a third in service. That's ultimately how that broke down most oftentimes.
Tell us a little bit about this financing business line that was in the third bucket, because this was pretty interesting and goes to your kind of good business buyer fit, because you were somebody who had the sales background, had the tech background, also had this kind of affinity for financing businesses.
Yeah, it's really a lot of copier dealers or document management companies, when they're selling equipment, they use an equipment lease all the time. I mean, a lot of businesses lease that equipment because at the end of 4 or 5 years, they're going to want to change it out and get the newest technology. So it doesn't really make sense for them to own it. And so in doing so, instead of just sending that business to a national finance company or national leasing company, with the background that I had been able to develop, felt like it would be a really great marketing tool for our salespeople to be able to walk in there and say, "Hey, you are only ever going to call one number. We're going to sell it to you. We're going to service it for you, and we're going to finance it. And you're going to make one payment. It'll all be on one bill every month to us. Your lease payment, your service payment, and your lease payment will all be on the same bill." And that really worked. That was something that resonated. Whenever I call on businesses or deal with other businesses, I mean, it's amazing to me the number of business partners you have to have in today's day and age. And so to be able to simplify that for a lot of the customers that we had, I think meant a great deal to them, and was a strategy that really worked well for us.
Yeah, I can totally see that being a successful pitch and value proposition. I will say, Jeff, that it seems like the business of financing is a very different business. So you really are spinning up a completely different business unit that doesn't have any of the same motion of your existing businesses of sales and service, correct? Say more about having this finance arm effectively.
That's a great observation. Yeah, we had to have a separate business. So we had a separate entity name for that business. And I had different people that were running that business than I did, in the main business Benchmark. Because you're right, it's a totally different business. You're in a finance business, you're, making credit decisions. If somebody was past due on a payment, you had that unfortunate reality of having to call them and put pressure on them to collect the payment. You didn't want to do that inside of the dealership. You would want to do that, in an outside entity. And so, there were enough differences to where, I had 1 to 3 people always running that particular business unit and really have nothing to do with the main line of business, but they did work together. And by having that finance company there did help Benchmark be able to sell more equipment and build deeper relationships with their customers.
And did you ever have one of those uncomfortable situations where your financing team is now having to lean on somebody who's not paying their loan payment?
Yeah.
Whereas on the other side, the sales and service people don't want you to beat up on that customer?
We did. Yeah. We had to go pick up a few. We had to repossess a few and we had a very low default rate, less than 1%, but sometimes, yeah, you would have to go get it, but we would turn those into a win for Benchmark as well. We'd go pick up that equipment, we'd sell it back to Benchmark at a discount, and then Benchmark would be able to go, remarket a slightly used or maybe, average use, middle of the term that was only 2 years old, and be able to go market that asset and put kind of a bounty on it for the salesperson or something like that to, take a bad situation and make it good again, and so the reality is that if they weren't paying their lease payment, they're probably not paying their service payment either. So not a huge deal there, but you had to apply the principles of, collections there in the finance company and
Sure.
stick to what sticks to what you have to do there. So
Anything more to say, Jeff, about your acquisition strategy?
I think something that's important for your listeners, Will, would be, I really encourage, when you're buying a business, oftentimes the person buying the business really wants to, step up and be in charge sooner rather than later. I had some really good advice given to me by some of the mentors in my life to not go fast with that. And so when I bought the business, I waited a whole year before I became CEO. And I bought the business, and I have these, new financial pressures that were on me. But because of how good of a business that I purchased, that I had learned through the due diligence process, I took the first 90 days of being there to not have any specific duty. And my sole goal was I went and rode with every employee on, one day or half a day each to get to know them personally and to develop a relationship. And I think that was the single greatest decision that I made in buying a business, was to not just buy the business and start leading, but I bought the business and I developed relationships so that I could lead. And so I think that is an important aspect to anybody that is buying a business, is that hopefully when you buy a business, you can put yourself into a scenario to where you can have a very thoughtful transition and something that goes well. Because ultimately, not every business is going to go great, and there's going to be tough challenges that all business owners face. And the better your relationship is with each one of your employees, the better you're going to be able to deal with those circumstances or scenarios that come about. So felt like that would be important to share.
That's wonderful advice, Jeff. How did you have the bandwidth to do that? Because we often hear that, it's drinking from a fire hose as you learn during that transition. And I guess it very much, of course, depends on the size of business. If the business is very small, you're going to need to get in there and lead whether or not you like it, just because there's not enough capacity for there not to be leadership. Maybe your business was of a size where you could ease into that role and take the time to learn, to take everybody out and spend hours with them and meet them. But anyway, how do you address that at that point?
Well, it certainly does take bandwidth, and it does take a commitment to learning the business. You got to remember, I just come off 3 to 4 months of due diligence where I learned an incredible amount about the business. And so what worked for me was to take, maybe get there an hour early, spend the first 2 hours of every day, working on the business and learning and whatever I needed to take care of. And then the next 6 hours being with people out in the field or something like that. And then maybe staying an hour after work or something like that to work on the business again. And so, I would love to tell business owners that when you jump in, you buy the business and you're playing golf every Wednesday and Friday afternoon, but that's not really the case. If you want to, do it correctly, it oftentimes, requires not just 40-hour weeks, but 50 and 60-hour weeks to, set the stage or lay the foundation to be able to,
Sure.
Achieve more time off in the future or whatnot. But that's how it worked, best for me in my scenario.
And how did you treat your acquisitions? You didn't do the same program with the subsequent acquisitions did you?
Well, I still spent quality time with them. Maybe I couldn't spend a whole day, but try to spend go on 2 or 3 appointments with them or whatnot. I did. I tried to do that as much as I could. It became harder, and I think that's the thing that you really have to be mindful of as you grow, any business, is that, the business you have at 10 people is not going to be the same business you have at 80 and 90, 100 people versus 1,000 people. And again,
Sure.
back to what I was talking about Xerox, how hard it became for them to run an agent program and do all that on a national scale. You have to continue to reinvent ways to push decision making down to your people within your organization. And I had to learn to rely on other great leaders, within our organization to lead the way I would want to lead whenever it became, big enough to where I was not able to touch all parts of the business. And what I found through that process was that, hey, there's a lot of people out there better than what you are, and then hire them for their core competency. And man, then you can really achieve some great things. And so some really good lessons, through all of that.
That was great, Jeff. And so 5-6 years later, the year was, you said what, 2017?
Yeah, into 2017.
You start getting interest from private equity. Tell us the story of exit, if you would.
Yeah. So really towards the start of the second half of the year, I got really a call out of nowhere that said, hey, we've acquired two other. I knew that this private equity firm existed because they had bought two other large Xerox agent dealers that I had attended meetings with and stuff like that. But I get a call out of nowhere that, hey, we'd like to acquire you. And it's like, I'm not really interested. I'd only owned this business for 5 years and said, well, we'd like for you to, we'd like to come out and do our dog and pony show for you and show you what we're able to do and what we want to do with the business. And I told him to come on. And so we met, and I remember that being a really difficult decision, but ultimately one is like, for what we had invested in the business over those 5 years and the amount of work we had done, I felt like that there was still a lot of room for the company to grow, but I also felt like it was another life-changing opportunity for my family. And so I needed to listen. And so ultimately did listen. And, we executed a LOI and then closed at the very end of the year as my oldest son was now in his senior year and in the football playoffs. And I remember that right before their third playoff game that same day, we closed on the transaction, and remember all those emotions. So
did he win his game?
He did win the game. Yeah, they scored.
Oh man, what a day!
Yeah, it was an unbelievable day. I won 45-24, and it was a culmination of a lot of hard work.
Oh man, congratulations! What a wonderful day and story. And Jeff, can you put some numbers around this for us? So just reminder, you were at 30 million in revenue, looking at getting to 35 the next year. So business's growth is continuing, if not accelerating. EBITDA, you had grown from about $1 million to, what did you say, between 3 and 4?
Between 3 and 4, yeah. And with the enhanced scale of the business that we now had, it was a 6 to 7 x exit.
Over the about 5x that you paid?
Yeah, over the 5x that I had paid. So got another turn or two on EBITDA, obviously on all the revenue and EBITDA growth. One thing that they didn't want was the finance company, not because it was performing bad. It just wasn't something that they did or could hold. Their charter was set up to hold those assets. So I ended up selling that separately, to a national leasing company, and that provided some cash as well in a good way. And so, exited the business, and then ultimately, I got a lot of stock options, and I still have those stock options today. 8 years later, that business is still doing well. They've done a lot of things to, grow that business really from 35 individual businesses into one business today, but doing well. And yeah, here we are today.
When you say stock options, you mean you rolled equity?
I didn't roll any equity. Yeah, it was additional incentives to stay with the organization. I ended up staying there 3 years and ran a third of the company for them. I ran the Southwest region for them.
And just to underline the numbers here, to a six or seven multiple on 3 to 4 of EBITDA sounds like that could be anywhere from high teens to mid 20s. Does that sound right?
Yep, you're right in the ballpark there.
Okay. On an investment that was, you didn't give us the exact number of equity put in, but we have a sense. So this was an incredible, really, return, and of course, a life-changing exit for you.
Yeah, not only me, but when I bought the business, there was some partners that I assumed. I should have mentioned that earlier, but the seller didn't have 100%. He had almost 85 to 90%. And I tell you, of all the things that I've done in my business career, when I bought that business and assumed those, I think it was 3 partners at the time, looking those partners in the eye and said, hey, we're going to achieve something. I mean, they don't know you at all, but to do that for them and to see the smile on their face when we exited in 2017, that felt really good, to be able to help them do that as well. And so I was excited about that.
Well, we're going to close in just a minute here, hearing about what you're doing today, which is as an investor, basically a professional investor. And so now you have a lot of your own LPs and investors. So I guess you really liked the feeling of deploying other people's money successfully, because here you are doing that full time. Tell us, just before we move into that, why you think you were able to knock it out of the park on the first try. You take all this risk, you buy a business with this vision, and lo and behold, the vision comes to pass, basically. And I don't mean to simplify or make it sound like those 5 years were easy, but you really did knock it out of the park on your first try. What do you ascribe that success to?
Will, I don't know. I mean, I think several things. Number one, we worked hard. I mean, I worked hard. I mean, it was when you're out proving yourself for the first time, I was definitely in an uncomfortable zone, and I had a lot of desire to achieve and to prove not only to myself but to others that I was fully capable of doing that. Number two, I bought a good business. I mean, I can't stress that enough. I didn't let, hey, I want to be in business for myself, overshadow the fact that, hey, I need to start with a really good business, and two, I need to work with a business owner that is a good person and has great character and all that. And, I think sometimes people can overcomplicate things, and they lose sight of, hey, I just want to be in business for myself. I'll take any business or whatnot, or I'll do this, or, I'll do that. And I think you really need to think long and hard and be willing to be disciplined on, what you may enter or what you don't enter. Sometimes your best decisions are what you don't enter. And then I picked a business that fit my skill set. I didn't try to go, do something, be a plumbing service, which I couldn't do anything, and so I picked something that matched my skill set, and then to, have the support of your family as well, and all of that, I think played a part. So I think it's a little bit of all of that.
Well, to close us out, tell us a little bit about Masked Rider.
Yeah. So Masked Rider Capital is a firm that proud to be partnered with 2 other individuals, Dusty Womble and Brooke Hobgood. Masked Rider is a very unique business. We are a hybrid between a family office, a private equity firm, and an investment firm. We're in business to help companies grow and to be there strategically whenever they need growth capital. Take somebody that's grown a business and has a long has a lot more upward mobility that they can still take with their business, but maybe they don't have the capital. We can be there to help support them help them grow their company. We're really Lubbock's first, I would say, institutional capital company that's available to Lubbock in the West Texas area. A lot of times businesses that grew up in Lubbock would have to go to Dallas or Houston or Austin, to find a private equity firm to help their companies grow. But, we are right here in Lubbock and get to see a lot of great businesses that come up through this area as well. And then I think the thing that separates us from others is that me and my other two partners have bona fide, legitimate operational experience as well, to not only from the investor mindset, but from a operational mindset. And that's really played well with some of the people that we've partnered with early on. We're involved in about 25 to 30 different businesses today, ranging from an oil and gas company to our 7 brew drive-through coffee concept, and then multifamily apartments or what have you, but involved in a lot of different things and have about $500 million of assets under management today.
That's great, Jeff. That's a sizable assets under management, especially for being the only one in Lubbock, or the first one in Lubbock. You went pretty big for being the first one in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, we haven't ever not gone bold. And so, we were worried about deal flow when we first started this business. And I would just tell you, Will, we're not worried about deal flow anymore. We're worried about making great investment decisions and growing those companies. And, we've been very fortunate to get involved in some really nice sized businesses with their own management teams. And so, but the skills I learned, at Benchmark and learning how to operate a business, we use those each and every day. Here I do at Mass Rider Capital. And then we've surrounded ourselves with a great team as well. We've got about 15 individuals, but all, in the C-suite, ranging from accountants to attorneys, that are all self-motivated and self-driven people that make this organization run. So it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun too. So really enjoy it.
And tell us, Jeff, about why become an investor as opposed to having another chapter as an operator, and how, or you can answer why that decision, but also just compare and contrast those. It seems like a path that most successful operators take. They eventually become investors rather than doing operations forever, but not everybody. So how did you think about that?
I just look at it as like, it gives you an opportunity to be involved in other different types of businesses. I mean, and to get more diversification across multiple concepts rather than just one. The thing you have to remember is that what made you successful at Benchmark is that you really knew everything about that particular company and what made it tick. And so, if you own 5 businesses now, you better spend the time to learn what makes each one of those 5 tick. You can't cut corners. And so that's the thing I would encourage everybody is like, don't go be an investor just to say, hey, I'm an investor. If you're going to invest in a business or several businesses, you've still got to spend the time to learn what makes each one of them tick and how they operate and what opportunities or challenges could be there for each one of those particular investments, what they might face.
Jeff, we appreciate the time. We appreciate the story. Congratulations on that run with Benchmark, and of course what you're doing now. But Benchmark is what we were here to talk about. And it was just a smashing success. You've already, as we said at the top, JD was inspired by it, so I'm sure others will be today as well. So thank you also for all the transparency and really giving us the numbers through that journey.
Yeah,
we'll put We'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes. Is there anywhere else you'd like to send people?
I think LinkedIn would be good, but appreciate your time, Will. Thank you. It's been fun.
Jeff Horn, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. Don't forget to subscribe to the Acquiring Minds newsletter. We send an email for every episode with an introduction to the interview, a link to the video version on YouTube, and soon, key takeaways, numbers, and more essentials from the interview for those of you who don't have time to listen or watch it. Subscribe at acquiringminds.co. You'll also find all our webinars there on the website, both those we have coming up and recordings of past webinars. At this point, there are over 30 webinar recordings, a wealth of information on all the technical nitty-gritty of buying a business. acquiringminds.co.